In this final video of the Hayrake series, I'll talk about my finishing techniques, and especially using shellac with a poly finish. I chose to go with Mohawk Rockhard finish, as this table needs to stand up to potential toddler abuse and needs durable spill protection. After sanding, you want to make sure that you clean up the dust that's left on the table between each level. You can see the amount of grit that's on there. If I didn't clean this up with a tack cloth between the sandings, I'd basically be grinding that dirt back into the wood and not really getting a good finish. That's where the swirl marks are going to come from. So it's really important between the levels of grit that you wipe down at least with a tack cloth, if not also using some denatured alcohol on the cloth to make sure everything gets cleaned up well. That will also help to raise the grain a bit so that the next sanding level becomes even smoother. So those are my sanding tips. We're going to fill this with a paste that we've made from walnut dust and shellac. It's basically our homemade wood filler. It's a 2-pound cut. I think a 4-pound cut might be a little bit better. It's just the regular walnut dust, and that's mixed up pretty good. So we'll just go ahead and spread it on there, anywhere we have these hairline cracks, and mush it into those cracks until they look filled. You can also extend up above it a little bit. The alcohol in the shellac is going to dry out a bit. And the idea is that the wood dust bonds with shellac as you put it into the crack. And as the alcohol dries out, we have a nice filled piece where you won't even be able to tell that there's even this hairline crack in the joinery. I prefer to mix just enough shellac for the current application so it's always fresh. De-waxed shellac will allow a poly layer to adhere to it. I find that grinding flakes first in a coffee grinder to a very fine powder before mixing with the alcohol helps it to dissolve quicker and more completely. A 2-pound cut is equal to 2 pounds of shellac to 1 gallon of alcohol. I'm only using a smaller amount here. I mix about 1 cup or 8 ounces of alcohol to 2 ounces of shellac. I chose Garnet Shellac for this application because it brings out the golden tones in the walnut. This is shellac on the back side. It's a second coat just to see what it would look like if it deepens our color any. Okay, we're gonna start doing our first layer of shellac and bringing out that beautiful walnut color. Don't forget you need to do the sides and undersides with each board that you do on the edge and the full underside. And the end, probably start with the end because it's end grain and that'll soak in. This is a tabletop after 2 coats of shellac. Between each coat, I buff it down with a green Scotch-Brite pad, clean off the sanding dust, and put down a new coat. You want to clean up your sanding dust in between coats with a lint-free cloth. And look for any remaining pieces that maybe could have been sanded down a little bit better. The sanding down will take out any raised grains. Like here I have a little spot of shellac that I can work on a little bit more. And it also gives you a chance to review the table from several angles of light. Might point out something different. The rest of that will blend in just fine with the next coat of shellac. One of the beauties of shellac is that it's very forgiving, and one coat will blend into another. Regardless of the type of finishing I'm putting on, I always like to wear gloves. It's going to prevent any hand oils from transferring into the wood finish itself and affecting your finish that you're trying to put down. I've seen it where people have inadvertently put their hand down as they're doing finishing and end up with their handprint in the middle of their work. It's not something we want here. Maybe a maker's mark, but not the kind that I want. And for putting on the shellac, you can either rag it on with a cotton rag like this. I prefer to put that cotton rag inside of a lint-free cloth. To start off with, you want to dab it into some alcohol, get that surface moist so that the shellac will flow a little bit better. I'm going to start with the underside, and once you start working with shellac, never stop. Just keep on moving. You want to work fairly quickly. Don't overlap a lot. Once your cloth gets dry, pick up a bit more. Always have something flowing on it. I like to work in narrow strips rather than a wide band. That enables me to have a little bit more coverage time and not have to worry about overlap as much. Only overlap the last little bit of what you're doing. Don't want to go over it again. With shellac, it's a lot better if you have a mistake, let it sit, let it dry, don't try and wipe over it. Take care of it when you do your sanding. And thin coats work really well. So 2-pound cut is kind of a standard cut for the initial coats. It's a lot easier to go with a thinner cut, like 1.5, 1 pound cut even. It's more coats, but less work in the end. And you can go over it again very quickly, pretty much like 2 hours. It's 4 a.m. and I'm up doing some sanding and preparing the tabletop for the second coat of the Mohawk, it used to be Balin's, Rockhard Ply finish. Well, I put the first coat on yesterday at about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I did it to a 50-50 solution thinned out with mineral spirits. Seemed to go on pretty well, looked really good afterwards, but it requires a 14-hour dry time between coats. And I can see why. It's slightly gumming up a little bit on my sanding pad, but not too bad. I have a couple of little balls of poly that have gummed up on the bottom and at one end of the table, the last one I did. So it does definitely need a full 14 hours of cure time. So why 4 a.m.? Yeah, well, our weather here has changed from being 90 to 100 degrees, dropping down to about the nice, comfortable for Texas 80 degrees. And now we're going to a high of 42 for today. Well, this finish requires 60 degrees or higher, and I wanted to make sure I could get at least 3 coats on before I leave, and time is running out. Tick-tock. So I wanted to go over a couple of the things that I found First of all, why do we need to sand in between coats? Well, with poly, you absolutely have to. It's not a sanding so much as a scuffing the surface. You want to get rid of any air bubbles that are between, any impurities that have risen to the surface. Want it nice and smooth because of that, but mostly because poly won't bond to itself. It needs a scratched surface for that mechanical bond to actually happen. If you're using shellac or something like that, a little sanding between coats doesn't hurt, but it's a light sanding. I've seen people talk about how they have all this poly dust lying around after they do their sanding. It sounds like they're actually taking away the entire coat of poly that they've already put down. In that case, I'd say either they're putting it on too thick in the first place to get down to a smooth finish, get rid of the bubbles that might rise to the top, or they're sanding it all the way down and sanding away everything that they just put on. That is possible too, very possible. All you want is enough to scuff up the surface. So this is my surface after I've scuffed it. I'm going to use my lint-free cloth and mist it with a bit of water and clean up the dust before moving on. You want to make sure you have a good clean surface, no dust particles to get into that second layer. So the next step is to clean this off, and then I'll add another layer that's diluted just to 10%. It's a pretty heavy mixture to begin with. I want to make sure it flows well with a brush. I want to use a natural bristle brush. If you don't use a natural bristle brush, I'd suggest ragging the Rockhard finish on with a dilution of no less than 30% mineral spirits to 70% Rockhard. Just remember that thinner dilutions require more coats to build up to the same thickness of protection as a thicker coat. The trade-off is being that it's easier to apply thinner coats and get a bubble-free and streak-free finish in the first place. Our finished Farmhouse Hayrake Table has a whitewashed maple base with walnut plugs and wedges. The top has been made to appear much heavier by using thicker edge and end boards. We hope you've enjoyed this series of building a Barnsley Hayrake Table. If you find these videos helpful, please give us a thumbs up, and if you haven't already done so, subscribe to receive future videos. If you build a hayrake table using this video, we'd love to see some of your work. Leave us your comments and upload photos of your project to any of the videos in this series. Good luck!